The black box on my porch held a copy of my house key. 48 hours later, my wealthy parents were begging for mercy. My name is Valerie Cross. I am 33 years old, and until a freezing Tuesday evening, I genuinely believed the deadbolts on my front door were enough to keep my parents out of my life. I was terrifyingly mistaken. As I pulled into the driveway after a brutal shift, I saw their dark blue SUV idling at the curb. They didn't roll down the windows or step out. They simply waited until my headlights caught their expression, then shifted into drive and sped into the darkness. That was when I noticed the glossy black box sitting directly on my welcome mat. A silver satin ribbon was tied around it, anchoring a small card with 4 words written in my mother's flawless, elegant cursive. Keep it entirely quiet. I should have left it there and called the police immediately, but the silent threat felt like a familiar command echoing from my childhood. I carried the heavy box into the entryway, grabbed a pair of kitchen shears, and sliced the ribbon. The very first thing I saw inside was a high-resolution photograph of my 7-year-old son Leo, fast asleep in his own bed. The second item was a freshly cut duplicate key to our back door. Beneath both sat a thick, cream-colored envelope embossed with the gold seal of a prominent family law firm. My knees instantly gave out, hitting the hardwood floor. I dialed 911 before I could even bring myself to read the first page. 2 officers arrived within 7 minutes, instructing me to step away from the contents and treat the box as a potential crime scene. As they began separating the documents, the front door clicked open. My husband, David, walked in, freezing instantly at the sight of the uniforms. His eyes drifted to the open black box, and every ounce of color drained from his face. "Please tell me they didn't actually do it," he whispered, his voice trembling. Those words terrified me far more than the photograph of our sleeping son, because they meant my husband possessed a dark secret I knew absolutely nothing about. Before I reveal the sickening web of surveillance the officers uncovered beneath those papers, and why my husband looked like he had just looked into the eyes of a ghost, let me ask you, what time is it where you are right now? What city or country are you watching this from, and what is the weather like outside your window? I am incredibly curious to see how far across the world this warning will travel. The moment David spoke, both officers turned their attention toward him, and so did I. For several agonizing seconds, he struggled to look at me, staring instead at the gold-embossed envelope. Finally, he pointed to the papers and asked the older officer if anyone had read the legal text yet. The officer, a veteran named Brooks, shook his head. David swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and confessed. 3 weeks prior, my father Arthur had cornered him at a coffee shop near David's engineering firm. Arthur had casually slid a document across the table, calling it a routine emergency medical guardianship layout in the event that David and I were ever simultaneously incapacitated. David had read the fine print, realized it gave my parents total control over Leo, and flatly refused to sign it, threatening to call the police if Arthur ever approached him again. My father had simply smiled, leaned in close, and murmured, "You don't get to make the rules in this family, boy." David kept the confrontation a secret from me because he desperately wanted to protect me from the crushing anxiety and deep psychological wounds I had spent nearly a decade trying to heal. I wanted to scream at him for keeping me in the dark, but looking at the black box resting between us, it was terrifyingly obvious that our silence had only given my parents the perfect cover to move in closer. Officer Brooks pulled on a pair of latex gloves and carefully began digging deeper into the box. Beneath the family court documents, he pulled out a small digital voice recorder, a high-capacity flash drive, a stack of 8x10 glossies, a wooden toy dinosaur, and a small knit blanket. My heart stopped. The blanket had mysteriously vanished from Leo's bedroom 4 months ago, during a brief, tense weekend visit my parents had forced upon us. As Brooks lifted it, a heavy, unmistakable wave of lavender perfume filled the entryway. It was my mother Eleanor's signature scent, the exact same fragrance that used to linger outside my bedroom door throughout my teenage years, whenever she stood in the dark, listening to my private phone calls. In an instant, the suffocating weight of being 17 rushed back into my chest. I remembered hiding my sketchbooks and diary beneath my floorboards, because Eleanor had already decided what career and life I was allowed to have. It wasn't a memory, it was a physical sensation of dread, the phantom click of a doorknob turning, and her cold voice reminding me that a loyal daughter has absolutely no need for privacy. The photographs in the pile were infinitely worse. One showed Leo sleeping peacefully in his bed, taken from an angle that could only mean someone was standing right inside his bedroom. Another captured him sitting at our dining room table eating breakfast. A third was shot through the chain-link fence at his elementary school during recess. The digital timestamps printed in the bottom right corners proved this tracking had been going on consistently for over 60 days. But the most chilling detail was hidden in the reflection of the school fence photo. Caught in the glare of a car window was a partial reflection of the photographer's face. It wasn't my father or my mother. It was a completely strange man wearing dark sunglasses. Officer Brooks instantly stopped treating the situation as a petty domestic dispute. He radioed for a supervisor, requested a forensic evidence technician, and demanded to know how my parents could have obtained a working key to our home. David closed his eyes in sudden realization. Last summer, my father had insisted on helping us replace the heavy deadbolt on our sliding patio door after a storm. We had meticulously changed the front door locks after cutting ties with them, but we had completely forgotten about the back slider. Neither of us needed to say a word. We knew exactly what that meant. They had been letting themselves into our sanctuary whenever we were gone. The thick envelope contained a beautifully drafted, terrifying emergency petition asking a family court judge to grant Arthur and Eleanor temporary custody of our son. It was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Though the final legal pages were unsigned, the attached character affidavits were fully prepared. According to these documents, I was a severely unstable mother who routinely missed Leo's medical appointments, left him unattended for hours, and suffered unpredictable manic episodes that rendered our household an immediate danger to a child. Every single word was a calculated fabrication. One affidavit even bore what looked exactly like David's signature. He leaned over the counter, his hands shaking as he stared at the ink. "That is a total forgery," he breathed. "I never signed this." The next page was even more devastating. A professional letter written on the letterhead of a prominent clinical psychologist I had never met in my life. It detailed extensive, entirely fictional private therapy sessions where I had supposedly confessed to severe parental burnout and suicidal ideation, concluding with a formal recommendation that Leo be removed from my care immediately before an avoidable tragedy occurred. The language was polished, clinical, and utterly terrifying, because to an outside judge, it sounded completely rational and urgent. Officer Brooks then pointed to the digital voice recorder. David recognized the exact make and model. 2 months prior, he had discovered an identical device tucked deep beneath the passenger seat of his truck. At the time, he assumed a coworker had dropped it during a carpool and threw it into a desk drawer. Now, looking at this one, we noticed a strip of heavy-duty black adhesive on the back and a small label that read, "Living Room 2." Officer Brooks carefully dropped it into an evidence bag without turning it on. "If there is a living room 2, it means there is a living room 1, he said grimly. The air in our house instantly turned ice cold. The officers asked for immediate permission to conduct a protective sweep of our home for any active surveillance equipment while they waited for the forensic tech. We eagerly agreed. Within 20 minutes, they discovered a microscopic camera lens embedded inside a smoke detector directly facing our dining room table. Another hidden microphone had been masterfully installed behind the central air vent, just a few feet from Leo's bed. The camera wasn't transmitting over our home Wi-Fi. It was saving high-definition footage locally to an internal memory card, meaning whoever planted it had to physically enter our home repeatedly to retrieve the data. My mind raced back to a school fundraiser 2 weeks ago where my mother had suddenly appeared out of nowhere, smiling warmly and hugging me tightly before I could pull away. I had thought she was trying to publicly embarrass me. Now, I realized she was serving as a deliberate distraction while my father used his duplicate key to enter our empty house. The forensic technicians spent hours photographing every device and collecting fingerprints. Officer Brooks warned us that, while the forged legal documents were deeply alarming, family court petitions could be drafted without ever being officially filed. However, he emphasized that the hidden cameras, stalking photos, and unauthorized entry escalated this into a severe criminal matter. He strictly advised us not to confront my parents, not to post a single word online, and to pack our bags immediately. David's brother lived across the bay, and though fleeing felt like surrendering our own home to the monsters outside, we couldn't risk staying. David quietly arranged for his brother to pick up Leo from a friend's birthday party without revealing the horrific details over the phone. Before we locked up, Brooks handed me a property receipt and paused. "Did your parents know your husband would be working late tonight?" he asked. I nodded slowly. My mother had called David's office that morning under the guise of confirming an old dinner invitation. Brooks looked at the strategic placement of the black box on our mat. "They expected you to find this completely alone," he said softly. The hidden message written on the silver ribbon finally clicked in my mind. Keep it entirely quiet wasn't a request for a peaceful resolution. It was a direct order to stay isolated, paralyzed by fear, and compliant. As we stepped onto the dark porch, the forensic tech emerged from the hallway holding a third evidence bag. Inside was a secondary memory card labeled with my name and a date from 7 years ago, the exact week Leo was born. We spent a sleepless night at my brother-in-law's house, jumping at every creak in the floorboards. The next morning, Detective Marcus Vance called us down to the police station. The memory card labeled with my son's birth week hadn't come from our current house. It was a digital archive my parents had been compiling for 7 straight years. It contained thousands of scanned financial records, surreptitious voice recordings, and candid photos. The earliest file was a secret audio recording taken in my hospital room just hours after I had given birth to Leo. On the tape, Eleanor's voice sounded incredibly sweet and nurturing as she repeatedly pressured me to sign a temporary medical authorization form while I was delirious from labor exhaustion. I had refused, but after I fell asleep on the audio, my father's voice cut through the background static. He distinctly said, "Don't worry, she'll bend to our will once she realizes how little control she actually has." Hearing those words years later felt like discovering a trap door beneath my entire reality. The drive also contained copies of our tax returns, David's corporate travel schedules, and heavily edited notes about completely ordinary marital arguments we had in the privacy of our home. A canceled doctor's appointment due to a snowstorm was cataloged as intentional medical neglect. A single photo of me holding a glass of champagne at a wedding was labeled severe substance abuse concern. They weren't documenting actual danger. They were meticulously manufacturing a fictional narrative to steal my son. Detective Vance introduced us to a specialized prosecutor, but warned us that building an airtight criminal case takes time. Arthur had already called the precinct, arrogantly claiming the box was merely a sentimental family archive delivered during a misunderstanding, and accused me of having an emotional breakdown due to long-standing psychological issues. He even dropped the name of a retired police captain to validate his character. He hadn't called to check if his daughter or grandson were safe. He went straight to controlling the narrative. Our family attorney, Evelyn Pierce, joined us at the station and reviewed the fake legal petition. She immediately noticed something the rest of us had missed. The clinical psychologist's license number belonged to a real professional, but the name on the document didn't match the state database. Furthermore, the notary stamp used on David's forged affidavit was genuine, but had been reported stolen from a local bank 3 months prior. Someone had built an entire legal trap out of stolen identities, assuming no one would double-check the fine print. Evelyn drafted a severe, legally binding cease and desist order, banning my parents from our property, Leo's school, and our personal records. As I sat alone in the conference room preparing to sign it, a memory from a decade ago flashed through my mind. I was 23, standing in their kitchen with an acceptance letter to an elite architectural fellowship in New York. My father had calmly taken the letter from my hands, torn it into perfect halves, and told me the family had already wasted enough money on my little hobbies. My mother had wept until I agreed to stay local. For years, I told myself that staying was my own choice because admitting the truth was too humiliating. Now, they were trying to rewrite my adulthood into another document they could destroy. I signed the order with a steady hand. That evening, Detective Vance called with a major breakthrough. The serial numbers on the hidden cameras led to a local high-tech security vendor. The buyer had paid in cash, but the shop's crystal-clear surveillance footage captured the purchaser perfectly. It was the exact same stranger from the school fence photograph, Silas Thorne, a notorious private investigator whose license had recently been suspended for illegal wiretapping. Emergency phone records proved Thorne had been in near constant communication with a burner phone registered to my father's commercial real estate firm. Before we could even process this victory, Evelyn Pierce called us in a panic. The fake emergency custody petition was no longer just a draft. My parents had officially attempted to file it at the courthouse that very morning, taking advantage of an ex parte emergency loop. They claimed David and I had vanished with Leo during a violent domestic dispute, that the police had raided our home because of my erratic behavior, and that they were the only stable relatives capable of protecting the child. They had literally twisted our desperate call to 911 into evidence of my mental collapse. Attached were the forged psychologist letters, the stolen notary stamp, and a signed declaration from Silas Thorne masquerading as a family safety specialist. Because the petition alleged an immediate, severe risk to a minor, a judge scheduled an emergency hearing for the very next afternoon. My parents strutted into the courtroom dressed like they were attending a high society charity gala. Eleanor wore an elegant cream blazer and held a leather portfolio against her chest, while Arthur confidently shook hands with a court clerk he clearly recognized. When Arthur looked at me, there wasn't a shred of guilt or fear in his eyes, only the familiar, icy disappointment he always showed whenever I failed to obey him. Eleanor tried to walk toward Leo, who was waiting down the hall with David's brother, but a stern court officer blocked her path due to our temporary protective order. Inside the courtroom, their high-priced attorney painted my parents as saintly, deeply concerned grandparents reacting to a dangerous household. He claimed the box was just a clumsy family archive, and the hidden cameras were a protective measure to document Leo's well-being. But then, Evelyn Pierce stepped up to the podium. She placed the original, uncropped surveillance photos directly next to the altered versions my parents had attached to their petition. The original school photo clearly showed David standing just 3 feet away from Leo, holding his hand, a detail my parents had meticulously cropped out to make it look like our son was wandering abandoned. Then, Evelyn played the voicemail Eleanor had left on my phone the previous night. The judge listened intently, his expression hardening by the second. Suddenly, Eleanor lost her polished composure. She stood up without permission, screaming that I had always been an ungrateful, impulsive child, and that someone had to secure the family's future before I ruined it. Arthur furiously grabbed her arm, telling her to shut up, but the damage was entirely done. The judge denied their emergency petition with prejudice, banned them from approaching Leo or his school, and immediately referred the forged documents to the state's criminal fraud division. Outside the courtroom, Arthur cornered me, his face twisted in rage. "You have absolutely no idea what you've just started," he hissed. "People in this city know who we are. They know exactly what kind of ungrateful daughter you are." I looked him dead in the eye and replied, "Then let them see the actual evidence." Desperate to control the narrative before the news broke, Eleanor sat in the courthouse lobby and typed out a frantic mass text message to our entire extended family, claiming I had suffered a massive psychotic break, manipulated the police, and tried to have my loving parents arrested. But in her blind panic, Eleanor made a fatal error. She accidentally attached the wrong file from her phone. Instead of a legal document, she attached a live screenshot from the camera hidden inside our smoke detector, showing our living room. She tried to delete the message seconds later, but it was far too late. Dozens of relatives had already downloaded it. A cousin immediately sent me a screenshot of the text. My mother had just irreversibly tied herself to the illegal surveillance equipment she claimed she knew nothing about. By that evening, Detective Vance, the district attorney, and the cybercrimes unit were all analyzing the digital footprint of that text. The metadata proved the image had been exported from a hidden folder on Arthur's corporate laptop titled Valerie_home_surveillance. The next morning, a tactical team executed federal search warrants at my parents' multi-million-dollar estate and Arthur's corporate headquarters. The search uncovered a horror show of obsession. Investigators seized binders tracking our daily schedules, our neighbors, Leo's teachers, and even extended family members who might side with us. They found pre-written anonymous tips addressed to Child Protective Services and David's employers, designed to systematically ruin our livelihoods and isolate us completely. 2 days later, Silas Thorne was captured at a cheap motel. Faced with a mountain of federal prison time, he immediately flipped, confessing that Arthur had paid him tens of thousands of dollars to break into our home and install the listening devices, while Eleanor provided the public distractions. Faced with undeniable forensic evidence, both of my parents accepted devastating plea deals. Arthur pleaded guilty to residential burglary, felony stalking, conspiracy, and forgery, receiving a multi-year prison sentence. Eleanor pleaded guilty to conspiracy, court fraud, and violating a protective order, resulting in a hefty jail sentence, intensive probation, and the complete destruction of her social standing. Their corporate clients vanished overnight. Their insurer refused to cover intentional criminal acts, and they were forced to liquidate the massive estate I grew up in, just to pay our multi-million-dollar civil settlement, restitution, and legal fees. On the day of her sentencing, Eleanor glared at me through the glass and whispered, "Was it truly worth destroying this family?" I looked back at her with absolute peace and replied, "I didn't destroy anything. I just finally opened the box." Today, the warning card that read, "Keep it entirely quiet," hangs framed in my home, right next to the architecture degree I went back and earned. It no longer represents their power over me. It stands as a permanent monument to the exact second my silence ended and my true freedom finally began.